A courtroom falls silent as a 9-year-old girl takes the witness stand, her hands shaking, her voice barely there. One answer could send her mother to prison. The judge waits. The prosecutor watches. Then a man in the back row slowly stands up. No one knows why. Yet, what he's about to say will change everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The courtroom was quieter than anyone expected. Not the polite quiet of procedure, but the heavy kind that presses against the chest. At the center of the room, a small wooden witness stand seemed too large for the child standing behind it. The girl was 9 years old, slight for her age, her feet dangling several inches above the floor. They swung once, then stopped as if she realized movement itself might be a mistake. Her hands rested on the edge of the stand, fingers curled so tightly around the wood that her knuckles had gone pale. The judge leaned forward slightly, reading her name from the file, then looked up. His voice was firm but measured when he asked her to speak. The microphone in front of her felt enormous, like it was waiting to catch every mistake. The girl opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She swallowed, tried again, and this time a sound emerged, thin and trembling, barely loud enough to reach the first row. Every adult in the room understood what was happening. She was not prepared for this place. She did not understand charges or evidence or intent. She understood only one thing. Her mother was sitting behind her, and something terrible might happen if she said the wrong words. Her eyes flicked over her shoulder, searching the benches. When she found her mother, their gazes locked for a brief second. The woman's face was tight with fear. She was trying desperately to hide. She did not smile. She did not nod. She only looked back steady, as if silently begging her daughter to stay strong. The girl turned forward again, her lower lip trembling now, her breath uneven. The prosecutor shifted in his seat papers, aligned neatly in front of him. He was patient. He had time. The law would take its course. The defense table remained still. No one interrupted. The judge waited, believing silence might help her gather herself. But the silence only grew louder inside her head. She squeezed the edge of the stand harder, as if the wood were the only solid thing left in the world. Her shoulders rose with a shaky breath. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke again, the sound of it startling even her. She stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening, as if she had just realized how exposed she was. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat and immediately regretted it. In the back row, far from the attention of the bench and the lawyers, a man sat alone. He had arrived quietly, taken the seat offered to him without ceremony. Most people in the room did not recognize him, and those who did quickly dismissed the thought. He was not here to be seen. He was here to observe. Keanu Reeves watched the girl closely. Not her words, but her eyes. He noticed how they darted to the door once, as if escape were possible. He noticed how her small chest rose and fell too quickly. He noticed the way fear was shaping her posture, pulling her inward, making her smaller than she already was. He had seen many rooms like this in his life, but never one where the imbalance felt so cruel. The girl's voice faded again. She stared at the microphone, frozen. The judge gently prompted her to continue. She nodded, though it was unclear if she had understood. Her hands trembled harder now. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away, quickly, embarrassed, as if crying might count against her. No one in the courtroom knew it yet, but this moment, this fragile pause, was already bending the future in a new direction. The judge waited a few seconds longer, then spoke her name again, slower this time. The girl nodded, but the nod was mechanical, like her body was moving before her mind could catch up. She tried to answer the question that had been asked, but the words tangled together. Her sentences came out incomplete, trailing off as fear interrupted her thoughts. Each pause felt longer than the last, stretching the tension across the room. Her eyes burned, and she blinked hard, determined not to cry again. She had promised herself she would not cry. Crying felt like failing. Failing felt dangerous. She glanced toward the prosecutor, whose expression remained neutral, professional, unreadable. To her, it felt cold, like he already knew something she did not, like he was waiting for her to slip. The courtroom air felt thick, stale. The benches behind her were filled with strangers who seemed impossibly tall and distant. She could feel their presence without seeing their faces, could sense the weight of being watched. She shifted her feet again, the movement small but desperate, as if trying to find a position where fear would hurt less. Her mother sat rigidly behind her hands, clasped so tightly in her lap that her fingers had begun to ache. She dared not speak. She dared not move. Every instinct screamed to rush forward, to pull her child away from that stand, to shield her from the eyes and the questions. But she knew any reaction could be seen as interference. So she stayed still, breathing shallowly, praying silently. The judge asked if the girl needed a moment. She nodded again, but even that seemed to take effort. A clerk offered her a glass of water. Her hands shook so much that she nearly spilled it, and a quiet ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She took a sip, coughed softly, then set the glass down with exaggerated care, as if it might shatter under the weight of her fear. In the back row, Keanu leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. He did not look at the judge or the lawyers. His attention stayed fixed on the child. He recognized the signs, not just nervousness, but something deeper, the kind of fear that comes from knowing the stakes without understanding the rules. He felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, a sense that the room was asking too much of someone so small. The girl opened her mouth again. This time, she forced the words out, each one trembling as it left her lips. She spoke about the day in question, about going to the store with her mother, about feeling hungry, about holding her mother's hand. Her voice softened when she mentioned that detail, as if touching something safe. Then it faltered again when she reached the part she knew mattered most. She stopped. Her face crumpled despite her effort to stay composed. Tears welled up, spilled over traced quiet lines down her cheeks. She whispered that she was scared. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. No legal argument could erase it. No objection could undo it. The courtroom fell into a deeper silence than before. Even the judge hesitated, his expression shifting from authority to concern. For a brief moment, procedure gave way to humanity. And in that pause, unseen by most, a decision began forming in the mind of the quiet man in the back row. The girl wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, embarrassed by the tears, but unable to stop them. She stood there, small and exposed, waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. Her breathing was uneven now, each inhale sharp, each exhale shaky. She did not look at the prosecutor. She did not look at the judge. She stared at the edge of the witness stand, as if the grain of the wood could somehow anchor her to the ground. The judge cleared his throat softly. He spoke again more gently than before, reminding her that she was doing her best. She nodded, though the reassurance barely reached her. To her, the room still felt enormous. The questions still felt dangerous. The future still felt fragile. Her mother pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry openly. She had never felt so helpless. She had faced hunger, exhaustion, and humiliation before. None of it compared to watching her child carry a burden meant for adults. She prayed that the court would see what this moment truly was, not testimony, but fear. In the back row, Keanu straightened slightly. His expression remained calm, but something had shifted behind his eyes. He understood that silence could no longer protect the child. The room was balanced on a knife's edge, one more question away from breaking her completely. The judge glanced down at his notes, then back at the witness. The pause stretched. The girl waited. The courtroom waited. And unseen by most, a quiet decision settled into place, one that would soon turn this fragile moment into something no one in the room expected. The story does not begin in the courtroom. It begins weeks earlier, on an ordinary afternoon that slowly unraveled into something unforgiving. The grocery store was small, the kind wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place, with narrow aisles and flickering fluorescent lights. The shelves were stocked, but the prices felt heavy. Every number on every tag carried weight. The mother stood in the aisle longer than necessary, calculating in silence, subtracting one item to afford another. She was thin, not by choice but by routine. Skipped meals had become normal. Hunger had learned to sit quietly inside her. She pushed the cart slowly, her daughter walking beside her, holding onto the side like it was a rule. Bread, milk, a few cans, nothing extra, nothing sweet. She checked her wallet twice before heading to the register, already knowing the balance, hoping it had not changed since morning. At the counter, the cashier scanned each item. The beeps sounded louder than usual. The total appeared on the screen. The mother paid careful, deliberate. She watched the cashier's hands. She watched the receipt print. She folded it without looking and slid it into her coat pocket. Then she left her daughter trailing behind her, unaware of how close the day was to breaking. What happened next would later be described in seconds and frames. Surveillance footage, timestamps, a freeze frame of a bag passing the counter, a line item that did not match. By the time the store manager reviewed the footage, the story had already hardened into accusation. Something was missing. A receipt could not be produced. To the system, the explanation was simple. To the mother, it was impossible. When officers came to her apartment days later, the knock sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. She answered with confusion, not fear, until the word stealing entered the conversation. Her daughter stood behind her, clutching the hem of her shirt. The accusation landed hard, sharp, and unreal. She tried to explain. She tried to remember every movement, every step, every scanned item. The officers listened, but their faces remained neutral. Procedure had already begun. In court, the prosecution told the story cleanly, too clean. They spoke of footage and timestamps as if they were truth itself. They showed still images on a screen pointing out moments where hands moved, bags shifted. They described intent as if it were visible. They emphasized the missing receipt, the inability to prove payment. Each sentence stripped away context. Each word flattened a life into a charge. The mother did not interrupt. She did not object. She sat straight in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of her, tracing invisible lines in the wood. She knew better than to react. She knew emotion could be misread. Every breath felt like it needed permission. The courtroom did not feel cruel. It felt indifferent, cold in the way systems often are. To the prosecution, this was a routine case, one of many on a crowded docket. To the judge, it was a file number with evidence attached. But to the woman sitting alone at the defense table, it was her name, her child, her future. And as the words dishonest and irresponsible echoed through the room, she understood that this was no longer about groceries. It was about whether the world believed her at all. The prosecutor continued, without hesitation, his voice steady, controlled, almost bored by familiarity. He outlined the case as if reciting a checklist, a small neighborhood store, a routine transaction, a discrepancy flagged at the end of the day. He spoke of inventory counts and register reports of how one item appeared to leave the store without being paid for. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. Certainty carried more weight than volume. On the screen behind him, the surveillance footage played again. Grainy, slightly distorted, a fixed angle that showed hands moving bags, shifting bodies, passing through a narrow frame. To the prosecution, it was enough. A pause here, a blur there, a moment that could be interpreted. He pointed to the screen and spoke the word intent as if it were something that could be captured by a camera mounted near the ceiling. The mother watched the footage without lifting her head fully. She had already seen it. She knew how it looked. She knew how easy it was for strangers to decide what they thought they saw. She replayed the day in her own mind instead. The weight of the cart, the sound of the scanner, the folded receipt in her pocket, the exhaustion that followed her everywhere like a shadow. None of that existed on the screen. The prosecutor turned to the matter of character. He spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded factual rather than cruel. Single parent, limited income, financial pressure. He framed desperation as motive need as opportunity. Each phrase landed softly but cut deep. He did not say she was a bad mother. He did not have to. The implication hung in the air. She felt her jaw tighten. Her hands remained folded, but her fingers pressed into each other until her knuckles ached. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She had learned long ago that reacting never helped. People with power rarely trusted emotion from people without it. So she stayed still, absorbing each accusation like a weight placed carefully on her chest. Her daughter sat several rows behind her legs, swinging just above the floor, unaware of how the words were shaping the room. The child did not understand inventory or timestamps. She understood tone. She understood that the man speaking did not believe her mother. That understanding settled quietly inside her, confusing and frightening. The defense attorney rose, briefly objected to phrasing, then sat again. The objection was noted, overruled. Procedure continued. The judge listened, pen moving across paper, expression neutral. He was not unkind. He was not warm. He was careful. Careful with the law. Careful with time. Careful not to show preference. The prosecutor returned to the missing receipt. He spoke of responsibility, of proof, of how the absence of evidence created doubt that could not be ignored. He did not mention how receipts are lost every day, how pockets tear, how paper fades. Those details did not serve the narrative. The mother stared at the table again. She thought about that receipt, how she had folded it, without looking, how she had tucked it away with muscle memory born of habit. She remembered meaning to check it later, then forgetting as hunger and fatigue took over. A small moment, a human moment, now magnified into something unforgivable. To the courtroom, the case continued to look simple. A set of facts, a likely conclusion. But to the woman sitting alone, every word felt like a verdict arriving early. And beneath it all, unspoken but ever present, was the fear that once a system decides who you are, truth becomes very hard to hear. As the prosecutor finished, the room settled into a familiar rhythm. Papers were adjusted, pens paused. The case as presented appeared complete. No raised voices, no dramatic outbursts, just a quiet sense that the narrative had already been written, the kind of story the court had seen many times before. The mother remained still. She did not look toward the jury benches. She did not look at her daughter. She kept her eyes on the table because lifting them felt dangerous. Any movement could be mistaken for guilt. Any emotion could be interpreted as defiance. She had learned that stillness was sometimes the safest posture. Inside, however, everything was loud. She replayed every step of that day, again searching for a mistake. She could point to something concrete she could explain. She found none. Only exhaustion. Only routine. Only the quiet determination to feed her child and make it home before dark. None of that fit neatly into the language of the court. The judge glanced at the file once more, then out at the room. His expression revealed nothing. He thanked the prosecutor and noted the evidence on record. His voice carried authority, but not judgment. Not yet. Still, the words felt final to the woman hearing them. Her daughter shifted in her seat, sensing the tension without understanding it. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her mother's back. The child felt something slipping through. She did not know what to call it. Stability. Safety. The certainty that tomorrow would look like today. The courtroom moved on to the next phase, unaware of how close it was to mistaking order for justice. To everyone else, this was procedure unfolding as expected. To the mother, it was the moment her entire life had been reduced to a question mark. And as the judge prepared to call the next witness, no one yet realized that the smallest voice in the room was about to carry the greatest weight. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file once more before speaking. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone who had presided over hundreds of cases. He acknowledged almost formally that calling a 9-year-old child as the sole witness was unusual. His words were careful, as if naming the discomfort without fully engaging with it. He asked the prosecution to confirm there were no other witnesses available. The prosecutor stood and answered without hesitation. There was no alternative, he said. The child had been present. The child had seen what happened. The facts required her testimony. He spoke as if the matter were settled, as if necessity erased consequence. The judge paused for a brief moment, then nodded. The rules allowed it. The process would continue. From her seat, the girl felt her stomach tighten. She had heard her name spoken aloud louder than it ever had been before. Her mother turned slightly, just enough to catch her eye. Their gaze held for a second. The mother's face was tense, but her eyes were gentle, filled with something between apology and encouragement. The girl nodded once, small and uncertain, then stood when instructed. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it was. Each step was slow, heavy, as if the floor itself resisted her movement. Her shoes made soft sounds against the polished surface noises that seemed too loud in the quiet room. She could feel every eye following her, though she did not look at anyone directly. She focused on the space just in front of her feet, afraid that if she looked up, she might forget how to move. When she reached the stand, she had to climb a small step to get behind it. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her fingers as she placed her hands on the edge. The microphone loomed in front of her, adjusted quickly by a clerk, who smiled politely and then stepped away. The smile did not help. It only reminded her that she was alone now. She did not understand what objections were. She did not know what relevance meant. She did not know why adults spoke in turns, or why certain words were written down while others were ignored. She only understood that this room could take her mother away. That understanding sat heavy in her chest, making it hard to breathe. The judge asked her to state her name. Her voice barely reached the microphone. It came out thin, almost lost, and she had to repeat it when asked. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, unsure where they were supposed to go. She glanced toward the benches, trying to find something familiar. Every adult in the room seemed enormous. Men in suits, women with folders, faces serious, unreadable. They felt like giants to her, towering not just in height, but in authority. Their clothes were dark, their voices firm. None of them looked afraid. That difference made her feel smaller than ever. The room grew uncomfortable in a way that could not be recorded in transcripts. Chairs shifted, a cough echoed, and then stopped. Even the judge seemed to hesitate before asking the next question. But hesitation was not intervention. The process moved forward, slow and deliberate. The girl swallowed hard and waited. She stood where she had been told to stand. She answered when spoken to. And though every instinct told her she should not be here, no one stopped the questioning. The judge explained the rules to her in a simplified way, choosing slower words, softer pauses. He told her to speak clearly, to answer only what she was asked to say if she did not understand something. She nodded at each instruction, though the meaning slipped past her like water through open fingers. The rules felt abstract. What felt real was the tight knot in her stomach and the thought that every sound she made could decide something she could not fix. The prosecutor approached the lectern again. His voice was calm, practiced, controlled. He did not raise it. He did not soften it either. He asked her if she knew why she was there. She hesitated, then said she thought it was because of the store. The word store came out small, like it did not belong in a place this serious. A few people in the room exchanged glances. No one spoke. He asked her about that day, what time they went, who went with her. She answered slowly, piecing together memories that felt fuzzy under pressure. The aisles, the cart, holding her mother's hand. Each detail felt fragile, as if it might crumble if she touched it too hard. When she paused too long, the prosecutor repeated the question. His tone unchanged the repetition, making her feel like she had already failed once. Her eyes drifted again to her mother, but she stopped herself quickly. She remembered being told not to look back. She did not know why that mattered, only that it did. So she stared instead at the microphone, at the thin wire trailing down from it, at the little red light that meant it was listening. Everything she said felt trapped once it left her mouth. The courtroom seemed larger from this angle, the ceiling higher, the distance to the door longer. She could hear her own breathing now, too fast, too loud. She tried to slow it down the way her mother had taught her at night when worry made sleep difficult. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It helped, but only a little. The prosecutor asked about the cashier, about whether she saw money exchanged. The question confused her. She had not been watching hands. She had been watching shelves, thinking about how hungry she was. She said she did not remember. The words felt dangerous as soon as she spoke them. Not remembering felt like doing something wrong. A subtle tension rippled through the room, not impatience, but discomfort. This was not how testimony was supposed to sound. This was not clean. This was not efficient. The judge shifted slightly in his chair. He reminded her again that it was okay not to know. His voice was kind, but kindness did not change the stakes. The girl nodded again, her throat tight. She answered the next question even more quietly. Her confidence drained with every word. She felt like she was shrinking inside her clothes, folding inward under the weight of adult expectation. And still, the questions continued. No one stood to stop them. No one said this was too much. The law required answers, and the child was the only one who could give them. So she stood there small and overwhelmed, doing her best, in a place that had no room for fear, even though fear was all she had. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the movement barely noticeable, but to her it felt urgent. Standing still had become painful, not in her legs, but in her chest. The longer she remained at the stand, the more exposed she felt, like the room was slowly peeling something away from her. She answered another question, then another, each one stealing a little more of her certainty. She did not understand why some answers seemed to please the adults, while others caused them to pause. She did not understand why silence felt worse than saying the wrong thing. She only knew that the room kept watching, waiting, expecting more from her than she knew how to give. Her voice grew softer with each response until it was almost a whisper. The clerk leaned forward slightly, adjusting the microphone, but the sound still felt fragile. The girl noticed the adjustment and felt a sudden rush of embarrassment, as if she had done something wrong again. Her cheeks burned. She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears that kept returning no matter how hard she tried to push them away. The judge glanced toward the prosecutor, then back at the child. For a brief moment, something human crossed his face. Concern, hesitation. Then it disappeared behind professionalism. He asked her to continue. His voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of authority. It was not a request she could refuse. The girl nodded once more. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the stand. She answered the next question with a single word. It felt safer that way. Less room to be misunderstood. Less room to fail. In the gallery, a quiet unease settled in. People shifted in their seats. A few looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing something that felt necessary on paper, but wrong in practice. Still, no one spoke. The process moved forward step by step, question by question, as if nothing unusual were happening. But deep in the room, something had already cracked. A child had been asked to carry the weight of adult judgment, and as she stood there small and trembling, it became impossible to ignore the truth. She should never have been here. The prosecutor began again with a voice that sounded almost kind. He smiled briefly, the way adults sometimes do when they want a child to feel at ease. He asked simple questions at first. "Where did you and your mother go that day? What time was it?" The girl answered carefully, relieved to hear words she recognized. Her shoulders loosened just slightly, as if the danger had moved a step farther away. Then the questions shifted. He asked her to describe the store, which aisle they walked down first, what her mother picked up. The order of items mattered now. The girl hesitated, her eyes drifting upward as she searched her memory. She could see pieces of it, the shelves, the colors, the cart rattling slightly. But the order blurred together. She answered as best she could, her voice uncertain. The prosecutor nodded, then asked another question, immediately not giving her time to settle. Did she remember her mother stopping near the register? Did she see money exchanged? Did she see a receipt? Each question landed faster than the last, stacking on top of one another. The girl's breathing quickened. She tried to keep up, but fear began to tangle with memory, twisting simple recollections into confusion. When she paused too long, the prosecutor repeated the question, this time slightly more firmly. The repetition made it feel like she had already answered incorrectly. She shook her head and said she did not remember. The words felt heavy as soon as she said them. The prosecutor tilted his head as if considering this. "So, you do not remember seeing money exchanged?" he said. His tone was still polite, but sharper now. The girl shook her head again, unsure if she was agreeing or making things worse. She wanted to explain that she had not been watching hands, that she had been watching the candy rack she was not allowed to touch, but she did not know how to say that in a way that felt safe. The prosecutor moved on without pause. He asked if she remembered her mother placing items into the bag herself. The girl frowned slightly, trying to picture it. She thought the cashier had done it, or maybe her mother helped. She was not sure. She said she did not know. The prosecutor repeated her words slowly, as if writing them into the air. "You do not know." Each time she expressed uncertainty, it was treated as something suspicious rather than natural. The pauses between her answers stretched. The room felt tighter. The prosecutor's questions began to circle back, revisiting the same moments from different angles. The girl felt trapped inside her own memory, unable to give the clarity being demanded of her. Behind her, her mother felt her shoulders tightening with every exchange. She leaned forward slightly, then forced herself back. She wanted to speak, to clarify, to protect, but she knew she could not. Any movement might be seen as coaching. Any sound might draw reprimand. So she stayed frozen, her muscles aching with restraint. The judge watched the exchange without interruption. He noted objections in his mind, weighed fairness against procedure, and allowed the questioning to continue. The law required facts. The girl was the only source. Emotion had no standing here. And so the pressure increased question by question, as the polite tone sharpened into something colder. The girl stood alone at the center of it, struggling to hold on to memories that were slipping away under the weight of expectation. The prosecutor stepped closer to the lectern, not aggressively, but deliberately. His questions no longer sounded exploratory. They sounded corrective, as if he were guiding her toward an answer she simply had not reached yet. He asked her again about the moment at the register, this time breaking it into smaller pieces. Where was she standing? How far from her mother? Which side of the counter? Each detail was isolated and examined. The girl's forehead creased as she tried to follow. She answered one part, then forgot the next. The sequence slipped out of order. She felt her heart beating in her ears, drowning out the words being spoken to her. She nodded when she should have spoken. She spoke when she should have paused. Each misstep seemed to invite another question, another correction. "So earlier you said you were holding your mother's hand," the prosecutor said, "but now you say you were standing beside the cart. Which is it?" The girl froze. Both felt true. Both had happened. She did not know how to choose between them. She whispered that she did not remember exactly. The prosecutor let the silence hang, then repeated her answer aloud, emphasizing the uncertainty. "You do not remember exactly," he said, looking briefly toward the judge. The girl felt the weight of those words shift away from her and into the room. Her uncertainty was no longer just hers. It had become part of the record. She swallowed hard and tried to steady herself. Her hands were damp now, slipping slightly on the smooth edge of the stand. The questions continued, looping back, pressing forward. Did her mother put anything into her coat? Did she see her mother look around? Did she notice anything unusual? Each question carried an assumption she could feel but not name. The girl shook her head again and again, her responses growing shorter, quieter. Behind her, her mother's breath came shallow and quick. Her shoulders were rigid, drawn up as if bracing for impact. She recognized the tactic now, even if her daughter did not. Pressure through repetition, doubt through precision. She wanted to stand up and say that children do not remember like adults, that fear changes memory, that hunger blurs details. But she stayed seated, her hands clenched, her silence enforced. The judge allowed the questioning to proceed. He watched carefully, but his focus remained on structure rather than effect. The prosecutor had not raised his voice. He had not violated any rule. The law did not account for how small the witness was or how quickly confusion could turn into fear. The girl felt tears threatening again, and this time she could not stop them entirely. One escaped and slid down her cheek. She wiped it away, quickly, embarrassed, but her voice shook when she answered the next question. The prosecutor noticed. He paused just long enough for the moment to register, then continued. Her uncertainty was now framed as inconsistency. Her pauses were framed as doubt. The room absorbed this framing quietly, methodically. And at the center of it all stood a child doing her best to survive a line of questioning designed for someone twice her age, carrying a weight she had never agreed to bear. The prosecutor's tone hardened now, though it never rose. Each question landed with quiet precision, leaving no space for rest. The girl felt as if she were being pushed forward without moving, urged to remember things that no longer felt real. When she hesitated, the pause was allowed to stretch just long enough to feel like judgment. Her answers became smaller. Yes, no, I don't know. Each one seemed to invite a sharper follow-up. The prosecutor repeated her words back to her, reshaping them slightly, placing emphasis where she had not. What she meant and what was heard began to drift apart, and she sensed it even if she could not explain why. Her mother's shoulders tightened further with every exchange. She leaned forward again, then stopped herself, hands gripping the edge of the bench. She could feel the eyes of the court on her back, measuring her stillness, waiting for a mistake. Powerlessness pressed against her chest, heavy and relentless. The judge glanced at the clock, then at the file. He made a note, then another. He reminded the girl to answer clearly and allowed the questioning to continue. Procedure remained intact. Emotion stayed outside the record. The girl's legs trembled now, fatigue settling in. Standing felt harder with each minute. She searched the room for something solid, something kind, but found only expectant faces. Her voice faltered again, barely audible, and she was asked to repeat herself. The prosecutor thanked her politely for her answer, then asked another question immediately. The rhythm never broke. The pressure never eased. And in that unbroken rhythm, something essential was being lost. A child's fear was slowly being mistaken for evidence, and no one yet stepped in to stop it. The silence grew heavier, wrapping the courtroom in quiet, unresolved tension inside. While the questions continued in the courtroom, the mother's mind drifted backward through years she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Not out of self-pity, but because survival had never left room for reflection. Her life had become a sequence of obligations measured in hours worked and bills paid, not dreams imagined. She woke before sunrise most days, moving quietly through a small apartment so her daughter could sleep a little longer. Coffee was optional, time was not. 2 jobs filled her weeks, one in the early morning cleaning offices before anyone arrived, another in the evening stocking shelves or wiping counters depending on who needed help that month. The work was never steady. Schedules shifted. Paychecks arrived late or light. She learned to stretch everything: food, energy, hope. She skipped meals without announcing it, telling her daughter she had already eaten, smiling, as she packed the girl's lunch with care. Rent was always late, never by much, just enough to keep fear present. She knew the sound of the landlord's footsteps in the hallway. She knew the tone of voice used when patience was wearing thin. She kept receipts folded, carefully stacked in an envelope. She checked, obsessively afraid of losing proof of anything. One mistake could ripple into consequences she could not afford. Her daughter knew none of this, or very little. The mother worked hard to keep it that way. She turned scarcity into routine, made simplicity feel intentional. She taught her daughter not to ask for things she did not need, not because they could not afford them, but because gratitude mattered. She framed honesty as something stronger than comfort, something that kept you safe when the world felt unfair. There were moments when shortcuts presented themselves, times when it would have been easy to bend a rule, to keep extra change, to accept a favor that came with strings attached. Each time she refused, not loudly, not heroically, just quietly. She believed integrity was something you practiced when no one was watching, especially then. She believed it was the only inheritance she could guarantee her child. Once, months earlier, she had found a wallet on a bus seat late at night. She had been exhausted, hungry, thinking about how little food was left at home. The wallet was full. Cash, cards, enough to solve problems she did not know how to face. She hesitated only a moment before turning it into the transit office the next morning. The clerk barely looked at her. No one thanked her. She walked away lighter in conscience, heavier in circumstance. In the courtroom, none of this existed, none of these choices, none of these sacrifices. The system did not ask how many meals she skipped or how many nights she stayed awake calculating how to make the next week work. It did not record how carefully she had raised her daughter to be truthful, even when truth felt dangerous. As the prosecutor's questions pressed down on the child at the stand, the mother sat still, her face composed, her history invisible. The charge reduced her to a moment, a blurry frame of footage, a missing receipt. The life behind it remained buried beneath paperwork and assumptions. To the system, she was a defendant. To her daughter, she was safety. And as she listened to the questioning continue, she wondered how much of a life could disappear before anyone noticed what had been lost. She had learned long ago that survival required silence. Complaints invited scrutiny, explanations invited doubt. So she moved through the world, quietly doing what needed to be done without asking for understanding. When her daughter was sick, she worked anyway, arranging care with neighbors she barely knew. Trusting people she had no choice but to trust. When her own body ached, she ignored it. Pain felt like a luxury she could not afford to acknowledge. Every decision revolved around one question. Would this protect her child? That question guided everything. It guided the schools she chose even when they were farther away. It guided the neighborhoods she avoided even when rent there was cheaper. It guided the rules she set at home. Always tell the truth. Always return what is not yours. Always look people in the eye. She wanted her daughter to grow up with something unshakable inside her, something no one could take away. There were nights when doubt crept in anyway, nights when the numbers did not add up, when the refrigerator hummed too loudly because it was nearly empty. She would sit at the small kitchen table after her daughter fell asleep, receipts spread out in front of her like evidence in a trial only she could see. She wondered if honesty was enough, if integrity paid rent, if doing the right thing mattered when the world seemed indifferent. But every morning she chose the same path again. She woke her daughter gently. She braided her hair carefully. She packed lunches with whatever she had. She kissed her forehead before school and reminded her to be brave, not realizing how literal that advice would soon become. In the courtroom, the prosecutor spoke of motive, financial pressure, opportunity. The words hovered dangerously close to the truth, yet missed it entirely. Yes, she was under pressure. Yes, she struggled. But desperation did not define her. Responsibility did. Love did. Those things did not appear on any report. She kept her gaze lowered as the questions continued, not out of shame, but out of discipline. She had learned that dignity often meant restraint. Still, her heart pounded painfully as she listened to her daughter struggle under the weight of adult expectations. She wanted to reach out to shield her, to tell the court that no child should have to explain a parent's life. The system did not pause to ask who she was beyond the charge. It did not ask how many times she had done the right thing when no one was watching. It did not ask how carefully she had raised her daughter to be honest, even when honesty felt risky. It saw a case, a possibility, a line item on a docket. She sat there silent and composed, knowing that everything she was could be erased by a misunderstanding, that years of quiet integrity could be overshadowed by a single accusation. And as her daughter's voice grew smaller at the stand, she realized how little the system understood about the cost of doing the right thing in a world that rarely rewards it. Still, she said nothing. She trusted that truth somehow would find its way through. She remembered small moments the court would never hear about, waiting in line at the pharmacy, counting coins twice before paying. Returning an extra $1 a cashier gave her by mistake, even when no one would have noticed. Walking an extra mile to drop off a lost phone at a police station, her daughter beside her asking why they could not keep it. "Because it is not ours," she had said. "Because doing the right thing matters even when it is hard." Those lessons were not theoretical. They were lived. They were reinforced every day in small choices that added up to character. She believed her daughter was watching even when she pretended not to be. Children always were. That belief guided her more than fear ever did. Now, sitting in the courtroom, she felt those same lessons turning against her. Honesty had brought her here. Integrity had not protected her. The system did not measure intention. It measured evidence. And evidence she was learning could be fragile. Her daughter's uncertainty was being weighed like guilt. Pauses were treated as omissions. Confusion was treated as inconsistency. The mother felt each moment like a bruise forming under the skin. She kept her posture straight, her face composed, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. She thought about all the times she had swallowed pride to keep peace, about all the apologies she had made for circumstances beyond her control, about how invisible she had become to a world that only noticed her now at her worst moment. The system saw a charge. It did not see mornings spent cleaning offices before dawn. It did not see evenings spent helping with homework after double shifts. It did not see a woman who had shaped her life around protecting a child from harm. As the questioning continued, the mother realized how easily a life could be reduced, how quickly context could disappear, and how dangerous it was when a system forgot that behind every accusation was a human being with a history no camera could capture at all costs today. The question hung in the air longer than the others had. The girl opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She frowned, slightly confused, as if the words she had been holding suddenly slipped away. Her eyes blinked once, then again faster now. She had forgotten what she was supposed to say, forgotten the shape of the sentence she had been building just moments before. Her hands tightened on the edge of the witness stand. The trembling that had been there before grew stronger, visible, now impossible to ignore. Her fingers shook so hard they knocked softly against the wood, a faint tapping sound that echoed in the silence. She tried to steady them, pressing her palms flat, but the shaking only spread up her arms. The judge leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm when he asked her to continue. Not impatient, not unkind, simply procedural. The girl nodded, though her face showed she did not know how to begin again. She swallowed throat tight and tried to pick up where she had left off. A few words came out. Then they broke apart. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence, splintering into something thin and fragile. She stopped again, eyes dropping to the stand. Her shoulders lifted with a shaky breath. The microphone picked up the sound of it, making her breathing feel too loud, too exposed. She wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, then froze, embarrassed by the gesture. The room changed. It was subtle at first. Chairs stopped shifting. Papers stopped rustling. The low, constant noise of a working courtroom faded away until there was nothing left but the girl standing there, struggling to speak. The air felt thick, heavy, as if everyone had inhaled at the same time and forgotten to breathe out. Her eyes filled despite her effort to stay composed. Tears pooled along her lower lashes, blurring the faces in front of her. She blinked hard, trying to push them back. Crying felt dangerous. Crying felt like losing control. She had already lost too much control. The prosecutor hesitated. It was the first real pause he had taken since the questioning began. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. For a moment he looked at the child not as a witness, but as what she was, a girl standing alone in a room built for adults. The pause was brief, but it was there. The line between truth-seeking and harm flickered into view. The judge noticed it too. His pen stopped moving. His eyes remained on the girl, his expression no longer neutral. He waited, giving her space without announcing it. The silence stretched fragile and unbearable. The girl's lips trembled. She tried again, forcing the words out. This time, they came as a whisper. She said she was scared. The word slipped into the room softly, but it landed harder than anything else she had said. No one moved. not the prosecutor, not the judge, not the lawyers. The word hung there unchallenged, undeniable. Fear was not evidence. Fear did not belong in the language of the court. And yet it was suddenly the most honest thing in the room. The case stood on the edge of something now. The moment balanced between cruelty and compassion, between pressing forward and stopping to ask whether the process itself had gone too far. And as the girl stood there, shaking and silent, the courtroom waited, breath held for whatever would come next. The girl stood frozen after she spoke, as if the word scared had taken the last of her strength with it. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, the rhythm broken shallow. She stared straight ahead, no longer trying to search faces for reassurance. It felt safer not to look at anyone at all. Looking meant risking another question, another expectation she could not meet. The judge cleared his throat quietly, then stopped himself. He seemed unsure whether to speak or wait. His eyes moved briefly to the prosecutor, then back to the child. The rules did not tell him what to do with fear. They told him how to manage testimony, not how to handle a child who was unraveling in front of everyone. The prosecutor shifted his weight. The movement was small, but noticeable in the stillness. He adjusted the papers on the lectern without looking at them, a habit that suddenly felt out of place. He had prepared for inconsistencies, for evasive answers, for resistance. He had not prepared for this. A child admitting fear did not fit neatly into his framework. He opened his mouth to continue, then paused again. The pause was longer this time. It carried a different weight. For the first time, the pressure he had been applying seemed to turn back on itself. The questions waiting on his tongue sounded sharper in his own head now. He could feel the room listening not for information, but for intent. Behind the girl, her mother's heart hammered painfully. She leaned forward without realizing it, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. Every instinct told her to stand, to cross the room, to take her child in her arms and end this. Her body strained against restraint. Only fear of making things worse kept her seated. The girl sniffed quietly, then wiped her nose with her sleeve, ashamed of the sound it made. She tried to straighten her back, copying the posture she had seen adults use. It did not help. Her knees felt weak. Standing felt like balancing on something unstable, like the ground might disappear at any moment. The judge spoke her name again, softer now. He asked if she could continue. The words were gentle, but they still carried expectation. The girl nodded faintly, though her eyes said she did not know how. She opened her mouth and tried to speak, but the sentence fell apart before it could begin. She shook her head, frustrated with herself, tears threatening again. The room remained silent. No one objected. No one interrupted. The absence of sound became its own presence, pressing in from all sides. This was no longer about evidence or timelines. It was about whether the system could recognize the harm unfolding in front of it. The case hovered at a fragile point. One more question could push the child beyond what she could bear. One pause, one intervention could change the direction entirely. Everyone in the room felt it, even if no one said it out loud. The courtroom had stopped breathing. The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. The girl shifted slightly, as if unsure whether she was still supposed to be standing there. Her hands slipped from the edge of the witness stand and hovered in front of her for a moment before she clasped them together, fingers interlocking tightly. They shook anyway. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, loud and insistent. Her eyes moved once more slowly toward her mother. This time, she did not stop herself. She needed to see her, needed proof that she was still there. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The mother's face was pale, her expression breaking despite her effort to stay composed. She nodded once, barely perceptible, trying to send strength across the room without a word. The girl looked forward again. Her lips parted. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. She swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet. Tears spilled over, now no longer contained. She did not sob. She did not cry loudly. The tears simply fell, steady and silent, like something giving way inside her. The prosecutor took a small step back from the lectern. He had not been instructed to stop, but he had stopped anyway. His gaze remained fixed on the child, his expression no longer sharp, no longer neutral. It was cautious now, measured, as if he too felt the weight of what another question might do. The judge rested his hands on the bench, fingers spread. His eyes did not leave the witness stand. He had presided over countless cases, had seen anger, denial, manipulation. He had rarely seen fear this pure, this unguarded. The law had given him authority, but in this moment, authority felt insufficient. No one in the gallery moved, no coughs, no whispers. Even the sounds of the building itself seemed to recede. It was as if the room had agreed without discussion that something fragile was unfolding and must not be disturbed. The girl whispered again, her voice barely there. She said she did not want her mother to go away. The words were not testimony. They were not evidence. They were truth raw and unfiltered. That was the moment when the case could harden into cruelty, pressing forward regardless of damage, or soften into justice, recognizing that process without humanity was its own kind of failure. And in that suspended breath, with every eye fixed on a trembling child, the future waited to be decided. Keanu Reeves sat in the back row where no one expected him to matter. He had arrived earlier that morning for an unrelated civic appearance. Invited as a quiet observer, a familiar face meant to lend support to a different proceeding scheduled later in the day. He had taken the seat offered to him without comment, nodding politely, keeping his head down. He had not come to speak. He had not come to intervene. He certainly had not come to change anything. At first, he watched the courtroom the way most people did, casually, respectfully. He noticed the structure, the rhythm, the practiced movements of people who belonged there. But when the child stepped onto the witness stand, his attention narrowed, without effort. It was not a decision. It was instinct. He watched the way the girl held herself, how her shoulders were drawn inward, how her hands searched for something solid to grip. He noticed how her eyes kept drifting toward the same place in the room, toward her mother, as if checking whether the ground beneath her still existed. Each time a voice rose even slightly, he saw her flinch. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal how alert she was to danger. Most people in the room were listening to words. Keanu watched patterns. He saw how fear shaped the girl's answers before the questions even finished. He saw how her pauses were not defiance, but calculation, how she was trying to figure out which version of the truth would hurt the least. He recognized that look, the look of someone too young to understand power, but old enough to feel it pressing down. He had not planned on staying engaged, but now he could not look away. When the prosecutor repeated questions, Keanu saw the girl's breathing change. When the judge spoke, he saw how she straightened automatically, responding to authority without thinking. When silence fell, he saw how it frightened her more than the words. These were details that never appeared in transcripts, details that never made it into rulings. As the girl whispered that she was scared, something shifted in him. Not anger, not outrage, recognition. He remembered another day years earlier, standing in a place far less formal, far less imposing, and witnessing a moment of honesty that no one else seemed to care about. He remembered a woman returning a wallet she could have easily kept, remembered the quiet determination in her face, the way she did not announce herself, did not seek praise. She had simply done what she believed was right, even though the world had given her every reason not to. He remembered thinking at the time how rare that kind of integrity was, especially when life was hard. As he watched the child on the stand, the memory sharpened. Details aligned in his mind, the way the girl spoke about her mother, the way fear and trust lived side by side in her eyes, the way honesty seemed to cost her more than it protected her. He shifted slightly in his seat, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. He had not come to be part of this story, but the story had found him anyway. And as the courtroom remained suspended in that fragile silence, Keanu realized that what he had once witnessed quietly and without importance might now matter more than anyone in the room understood. Keanu remained still, but his attention sharpened. He was no longer just observing the room. He was reading it, the rhythm of the questioning, the way authority flowed in one direction only, the way fear filled the spaces left behind. He noticed how quickly the adults adjusted to discomfort by returning to procedure as if order itself could justify what was happening. The girl's fear did not surprise him. What unsettled him was how invisible it was becoming to the process, how easily it was being absorbed and reframed as something else. Hesitation became uncertainty. Uncertainty became doubt. Doubt quietly leaned toward guilt. He had seen this pattern before, not only in courtrooms, but in countless systems where power mistook compliance for truth. He watched the mother now, how she sat perfectly still, almost unnaturally so, how her restraint was not calm, but control, the kind learned through experience, the kind built from knowing that reacting could make things worse. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands pressed together as if holding something back. He understood that posture. It was the posture of someone used to being judged. His memory returned again to that wallet. The woman had not known he was watching. She had not known anyone important was nearby. She had not known the choice mattered beyond the moment. Yet she had made it anyway. He remembered thinking then that integrity was often quiet, often unseen and rarely rewarded, but it was real, and it left an impression. As he looked back at the child, he felt the same impression forming again. The girl was not trying to protect herself. She was trying to protect her mother. That distinction mattered. It changed everything. Her fear was not about consequence for herself. It was about loss, about separation, about a future she could not imagine surviving. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. He did not clench it. He did not show reaction. He simply felt the weight of the realization settle in. This case was being shaped by fragments, by technicalities, by interpretations stripped of context. And yet, context was sitting right there on the stand, shaking unheard. He looked around the courtroom. At the judge, bound by rules. At the prosecutor trained to pursue consistency, not compassion. At the gallery, quiet and uncertain. He understood that no one here was cruel by intention. That made it more dangerous. Harm done without malice was harder to stop. He had not planned to speak. He did not want attention. He did not believe in grand gestures, but he also believed that silence at certain moments was not neutrality. It was consent. The memory of the wallet felt closer now, less like a past moment and more like a responsibility returning. He understood suddenly why it had stayed with him, why it had surfaced now. It was not about him witnessing honesty. It was about someone else needing that honesty to be seen. Keanu drew a slow breath and let it out quietly. He did not move yet, but the decision was forming steady and unavoidable. He knew that if the moment passed, it could not be recovered. And as the courtroom remained suspended between harm and humanity, the man in the back row prepared to stand. Keanu sat back, slightly grounding himself before doing anything at all. He had learned over the years that acting from impulse rarely led to clarity. This moment required something else. Precision, restraint, respect for the room he was in and the lives balanced within it. He looked again at the girl. She was still standing at the witness stand, smaller than ever, her fear now fully visible. She was not performing. She was enduring. That distinction settled deeply in him. He knew courage did not always look like confidence. Sometimes it looked like a child staying on her feet when everything inside her wanted to run. His thoughts returned one last time to the memory that had followed him for years. The woman with the wallet had not asked for permission to do the right thing. She had simply acted quietly, trusting that truth mattered even when no one seemed to care. That memory had stayed with him because it reminded him that character was not proven in comfort, but in scarcity. He realized then that what he carried was not evidence in the legal sense. It was context, humanity, a missing piece the court did not know it needed. Keanu glanced briefly toward the judge, then toward the prosecution, not with challenge, but with intention. He was not here to accuse anyone. He was not here to argue the law. He understood his place, and he understood the risk of overstepping it. Still, something was clear now. The child on the stand could not carry this alone. Silence at this point would not be respectful. It would be abandonment. He adjusted his posture, planting his feet firmly on the floor. His hands rested calmly on his knees. His expression remained composed, almost unreadable. To anyone watching casually, he still looked like an observer. But inside, the decision was complete. The moment was coming, and when it did, he would stand. The girl stood motionless at the witness stand, her silence no longer tentative but absolute. The questions had stopped, yet she did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on the edge of the wood, unfocused as if the room had faded away. Whatever strength she had been drawing from was gone. The pause stretched, and this time it did not feel procedural. It felt final. In the back row, Keanu shifted. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but in a room that had stopped breathing, even subtle changes carried weight. He placed his hands on the bench beside him and rose slowly, deliberately, as if giving the moment time to adjust around him. He did not clear his throat. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood, heads turned in waves, first a few, then more. A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery, recognition passing from one person to another in whispers and glances. The judge noticed immediately. His eyes lifted from the file and fixed on the man now standing at the back of the courtroom. Keanu waited. He did not step forward. He did not gesture. He allowed the room to settle, to understand that he was not interrupting out of impulse. When the judge acknowledged him, Keanu spoke calmly, his voice even respectful, carrying without effort. He asked the court for permission to speak, not to object, not to defend, not to present testimony. He made that clear immediately. He said he was not a lawyer, he was not representing the defendant, he was not offering evidence in the legal sense. He explained that he had witnessed something in real life outside this courtroom that he believed might provide context relevant to the court's understanding of character. He said he would keep it brief. He said he would defer completely to the court's discretion. The room murmured again, louder this time. The prosecutor turned fully toward him, surprise flashing briefly across his face before it was replaced with calculation. This was unexpected. This was irregular. The defense attorney sat up straighter, unsure whether to hope or remain cautious. The judge did not respond immediately. He studied Keanu carefully, assessing not only the request, but the manner in which it was made. The judge had spent decades weighing credibility. He had learned to recognize posturing ambition and disruption. What he saw instead was restraint, patience, an awareness of boundaries. Still, rules mattered. The judge asked Keanu to clarify the nature of what he wished to say. Keanu answered plainly. He said it was an observation he had made some time ago involving the defendant that had remained with him. He repeated that he was not asking the court to treat it as proof, only as perspective. The girl remained at the stand, unaware of most of this. Her focus turned inward. Her mother looked up for the first time in minutes, confusion and cautious hope flickering across her face. She did not recognize the man standing, but she felt the shift in the room. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair. His fingers tapped once against the bench, a quiet sound in the stillness. He weighed decorum against relevance, order against humanity, the risk of precedent against the risk of injustice. The courtroom waited, and then, after a pause that felt longer than it was, the judge nodded once. Permission was granted, the murmurs faded, the air changed, and for the first time since the child had taken the stand, the weight in the room shifted away from her. Keanu remained standing steady and composed, ready to speak. The judge's nod did not come with ceremony. There was no announcement, no explanation to the room, just a single measured motion that carried authority. The meaning was clear. The court would allow this carefully on its own terms. Keanu acknowledged the decision with a slight incline of his head. He did not step forward yet. He remained where he was, creating distance between himself and the witness stand, between his words and the child who had already carried too much. His posture stayed relaxed, his hands loosely at his sides. Nothing about him suggested urgency or performance. The prosecutor rose halfway from his chair instinctively, then stopped. He glanced at the judge, then back at Keanu. This was not a situation he could easily object to without appearing unreasonable. No rules had been broken yet, no claim had been made, only a request granted by the bench. The defense attorney watched intently, unsure whether this would help or complicate things. Years of practice had taught him to be wary of unexpected allies. Still, he said nothing. He waited. Keanu spoke again briefly before beginning anything substantive. He thanked the court for the opportunity. He repeated that he understood the boundaries of the room and would stay within them. He emphasized that he was not here to influence outcome, only to share something he had personally seen, something that might be useful to consider. The judge listened without interruption. His eyes remained steady, alert. He made a note, then looked toward the prosecutor. The glance was not a question, but a reminder. This was the court's decision. A quiet unease spread through the gallery. People shifted in their seats, sensing that the trial had stepped off its expected path. Not dramatically, not recklessly, but enough to make the outcome less certain than it had been moments before. At the witness stand, the girl finally lowered herself onto the small chair behind her, guided gently by the clerk. Her legs trembled as she sat. She did not understand what was happening, only that the pressure had eased slightly. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, wiping her face with her sleeve, breathing slowly as if relearning how. Her mother watched Keanu, now studying him with cautious intensity. She had no idea who he was. That did not matter. What mattered was that someone had seen what the room had almost missed. Someone had stood up when standing felt dangerous. The judge adjusted his position, signaling readiness. He reminded Keanu that the court expected clarity and restraint. Keanu agreed without hesitation. He said nothing more than necessary. The room settled again, but the silence was different now. Less suffocating, more attentive. It was the silence that follows a decision, not the silence that precedes harm. Keanu took a slow breath. What he was about to say was not dramatic. It was not polished. It was simply true. And sometimes truth did not need permission to matter. Keanu remained standing, allowing a final moment for the room to settle. He did not rush into speech. He understood that timing mattered as much as words. The judge watched him closely, measuring not only what might be said, but how it would be said. The courtroom, now fully aware that something unusual was unfolding, leaned into the silence instead of resisting it. A clerk moved quietly, adjusting a chair, ensuring the child was seated comfortably. The girl sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes lowered, her breathing slowly evening out. For the first time since she had been called forward, she was not the center of attention. The relief was visible in the way her shoulders dropped just a little. The prosecutor cleared his throat, then stopped himself. Any interruption now would feel misplaced. He stood still, listening, his earlier certainty replaced by careful watchfulness. This was no longer a straightforward sequence of questions and answers. The courtroom had entered unfamiliar ground. Keanu finally spoke again, his voice steady, measured, and calm. He reiterated one last time that he would not discuss the case itself. He would not describe the events at the store. He would not speak about evidence or footage or timelines. He wanted the court to understand that clearly before he said anything else. The judge acknowledged this with a brief nod. He appreciated the restraint. It mattered. Keanu's gaze moved briefly toward the defense table, then toward the witness stand, then back to the judge. He was careful not to look directly at the child for too long. He did not want to add pressure, even unintentionally. This was not about placing another burden on her. It was about lifting one. A low murmur passed through the gallery again, then faded. The tension in the room had changed shape. It was no longer sharp. It was anticipatory. People sensed that whatever came next would not be loud, but it would be significant. The judge leaned forward slightly, signaling that the court was ready. He reminded everyone present that decorum would be maintained and that the court reserved the right to intervene if boundaries were crossed. His tone was firm but not hostile. It carried trust as much as authority. Keanu acknowledged this without speaking. He took one more breath, grounding himself fully in the moment. He had not come to this courtroom intending to matter. He had not expected to stand. But now that he was here, permission granted, the path was clear. The silence held, and with the weight of the room balanced carefully between skepticism and hope, Keanu prepared to tell a simple story that might change everything. Keanu began without drama. No raised voice, no attempt to command the room. He spoke the way someone speaks when they are certain the truth does not need decoration. He said the incident happened several months earlier on an ordinary day in a place no one would remember if nothing unusual had occurred. A public space, busy, forgettable. People moving in every direction, each wrapped in their own concerns. He had been there briefly, not paying much attention, until something small caught his eye. A wallet lay on the ground near a bench. He described how most people walked past it without noticing, how a few glanced down and kept going. Then he described a woman who stopped. She was thin, he said, not sickly, but worn in a way that suggested long days and short nights. Her clothes were clean, but faded, chosen for function rather than style. Beside her stood a young girl, quiet watching. Keanu said the woman picked up the wallet and opened it just enough to see what it was. Inside were cards, identification, cash, enough to matter. Enough that many people, given the circumstances he could already sense, might have hesitated longer than she did. He paused, slightly letting the room absorb that detail. He said the woman looked around, not nervously, not guiltily, but thoughtfully, as if weighing something invisible. He noticed her hand tighten around the wallet for just a second, then relax. He said she bent down and spoke softly to the child beside her, words he could not hear, but a tone that was gentle and firm. Then she walked, not toward an exit, not toward a place where she could disappear. She walked against the flow of people, past inconvenience, past effort, toward a service desk she could have easily ignored. It took time. It took energy. It took intention. Keanu described how she handed the wallet over without asking a question, without checking the amount, without looking back. The clerk barely glanced up. There was no gratitude, no acknowledgement, just procedure. The woman accepted it without comment. He said what stayed with him was not the act itself, but the way she walked away afterward. Shoulders still tense, steps still heavy, as if doing the right thing had not made her life easier, only clearer. As he spoke, something subtle shifted in the room. The mother at the defense table slowly lifted her head, not all at once, gradually, as if the words were pulling her attention upward despite her caution. Her eyes fixed on Keanu, now wide with recognition she did not yet dare to trust. The girl seated near the stand tilted her head, slightly listening. She did not fully understand the story, but something in it felt familiar. A memory stirred, half-formed. The prosecutor's posture changed. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. His pen paused mid-note. He did not interrupt, but his focus sharpened, calculation replacing certainty. Keanu continued, still calm, still careful. He said he did not know the woman's name then, did not know her story. He only knew what he had seen. A choice made when no one was watching. A choice that would never appear on footage or reports. A choice that revealed something cameras could not capture. He let the silence settle after that. And in that silence, recognition spread quietly like a truth, finally finding space to exist. Keanu said he remembered the child especially, how she stood close to the woman's side, not clinging but alert, watching everything. He remembered the way the woman spoke to her afterward, kneeling briefly so their eyes were level. He could not hear the words, but he recognized the intention. It was not explanation. It was teaching, the kind that does not wait for comfort to be convenient. He said that moment stayed with him because it felt unperformed. There was no audience, no reward, no reason to expect anything in return. The woman had not even looked relieved. She had looked resolved, as if returning the wallet was not a decision, but a rule she lived by, regardless of cost. As Keanu spoke, the mother's hands slowly loosened in her lap. Her shoulders, held rigid for hours, dropped a fraction. She did not interrupt. She did not react outwardly. But something unmistakable had changed. Her eyes glistened, not with fear now, but with the quiet shock of being seen. She recognized the moment immediately. The bus station, the bench, the ache in her stomach that day, the weight of the wallet in her hand, and the brief, terrifying thought of how much easier life could be if she kept it. The child beside her, her daughter, watching, learning. She had made the choice she always made, the choice she hoped her daughter would remember. Her gaze stayed locked on Keanu, disbelief mixing with something like relief. She had never told anyone about that day, not because it was secret, but because it did not feel like something that needed to be said. It was simply who she was. The girl shifted in her seat now, leaning forward, her brow furrowed, then smoothed. The memory came into focus for her more slowly. She remembered standing near the bench, remembered her mother's voice low and steady, remembered being told why they could not keep what was not theirs. She remembered feeling confused, then proud. The prosecutor straightened fully in his chair. His pen stopped moving altogether. His jaw tightened. He did not object. He did not interrupt. But the certainty he had carried into this courtroom no longer sat as comfortably. This was not evidence he could cross-examine, not footage he could reframe. It was character described by someone with no apparent motive to fabricate it. The judge watched closely, his expression unreadable but intent. He had heard many stories in his career, few offered without agenda, fewer still delivered with such restraint. Keanu concluded simply. He said he did not come forward then because it did not seem necessary. The woman had not asked for recognition. The moment had passed. But now, seeing the child on the stand, struggling under questions about honesty, he felt it mattered that the court know who this woman had been when no one was watching. He stopped speaking. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with reconsideration, heavy with the realization that something essential had been missing from the story until now. The judge did not speak immediately after Keanu finished. He sat still, hands resting on the bench, eyes lowered for a moment, as if replaying the words in his mind. The silence felt deliberate now, not fragile. It carried weight. When he finally looked up, his gaze moved not to the defendant or the child, but to Keanu. He asked a careful question measured in tone and scope. He asked Keanu to clarify when the incident occurred and where. He asked whether anyone else had been present. He asked whether the woman had identified herself or sought acknowledgement. The questions were precise, not confrontational. They were designed to understand, not to dismantle. Keanu answered each one plainly. He gave the approximate date. He described the location as accurately as memory allowed. He said there had been other people nearby, but none who seemed to notice the moment. He confirmed that the woman had not left her name, had not asked for thanks, had not lingered. He repeated that it was not the act itself that stayed with him, but the intention behind it. The prosecutor rose quickly. He objected, citing relevance. He argued that character anecdotes, however compelling, did not establish facts regarding the alleged theft. His voice was controlled, but tension threaded through it now. This was unfamiliar ground, and he knew it. The judge listened without interruption. He nodded once, acknowledging the objection. Then, after a brief pause, he asked the prosecutor if he wished to withdraw it. The room shifted. The prosecutor hesitated. He looked at the judge, then at Keanu, then briefly at the defense table. He understood the risk. Pressing the objection too forcefully might make it appear as though he feared the implication. He cleared his throat and withdrew the objection, stating that the court could consider the statement for whatever limited weight it deemed appropriate. The judge accepted this without comment. He turned back to Keanu and thanked him. He reminded the court that what had been shared did not constitute proof of innocence. It did not negate evidence. But he added carefully, it did introduce context, character, humanity, elements that, while not definitive, could not be ignored. As the judge spoke, a low murmur rippled through the gallery, not loud enough to disrupt, but enough to signal that the certainty which had dominated the room earlier was gone. People leaned toward one another, slightly whispering impressions, recalibrating assumptions. The mother sat motionless, her heart pounding. She did not allow herself to hope yet. Hope felt dangerous. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way the room no longer pressed down on her chest, in the way eyes now lingered on her with curiosity rather than suspicion. At the witness stand, the girl gripped the edge of the wood, again fingers tight. She did not understand the legal significance of what had just occurred. She only knew that the pressure had changed direction. The questions had stopped. The room felt different, less hostile, less sharp. She looked around uncertain, searching faces for cues she could not read. The judge glanced at the clock, then back at the case file. He announced a brief recess. His tone was calm, procedural, but there was intention beneath it now. He instructed the clerk quietly to verify the incident Keanu had described. No announcement, no emphasis, just a request issued softly, as if he did not want to disturb the fragile balance that had just been achieved. As the gavel struck lightly, the courtroom filled with restrained tension. Conversations sparked in low voices. The prosecutor gathered his papers, jaw tight, mind racing. The defense attorney leaned toward his client, offering a few quiet words of reassurance without making promises. The girl remained where she was, hands still gripping the stand, unsure what had just happened. She did not know what a recess meant. She did not know what verification was. She only sensed that something important had changed. For the first time since the trial began, doubt had entered the court. The recess did not bring relief. It brought uncertainty. People rose slowly from their seats, careful not to speak too loudly, as if volume itself might tip the balance one way or another. The courtroom filled with a low, restless energy, restrained but unmistakable. Nothing had been decided yet. Nothing felt the same. The clerk moved quickly, slipping out through a side door with quiet urgency. The instruction had been subtle, but its meaning was clear. Verification mattered now. The system, which moments earlier had been content with assumptions, was being asked to look again. The prosecutor stood near his table, scanning his notes without really seeing them. His posture was rigid, his mind clearly working through implications. He had not lost control of the case, but he had lost certainty. That loss showed in the way he tapped his pen once, then stopped, aware of how even small movements were being noticed now. The defense attorney leaned in toward the mother and spoke softly. He did not promise victory. He did not speak in absolutes. He told her only that the court was listening. That was enough to make her chest tighten with emotion she forced herself to contain. She nodded once, grateful but cautious. She had learned not to trust sudden turns. The girl remained near the stand, unsure whether she was allowed to move. A bailiff gently guided her back to the bench beside her mother. She sat down slowly, her legs weak, her hands still shaking. She leaned into her mother's side without speaking, needing contact more than words. Her mother wrapped an arm around her, careful, protective, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Keanu remained standing where he was, then slowly sat back down. He did not look around for reaction. He did not seek acknowledgement. His role was finished for now. Whether it mattered was no longer his decision. As minutes passed, whispers grew quieter. People waited. Some checked the clock. Others stared at nothing, lost in thought. The air felt charged, like a storm paused mid-sky. Somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, a simple truth was being checked. A small moment from months ago, overlooked and unrecorded, was now carrying weight it had never been meant to bear. Inside the room, everyone waited to see whether doubt would fade away quietly or grow into something that could no longer be ignored. The courtroom reconvened with a different kind of stillness. It was no longer the silence of tension or fear. It was the silence of anticipation. People returned to their seats more quickly, this time, movements efficient, restrained. Something had happened during the recess. Everyone could feel it. The clerk re-entered first, carrying a thin folder pressed close to her chest. She moved with purpose, her expression focused, professional. She handed the folder to the judge without ceremony and stepped back. The sound of the folder touching the bench seemed louder than it should have been. The judge opened it slowly. He scanned the contents once, then again, more carefully. His brow tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in concentration. He adjusted his glasses and looked up, his gaze moving across the room before settling on the prosecutor. The judge spoke calmly, but the tone had changed. There was less detachment in it now, more precision. He summarized what had been found. Store transaction records had been reviewed again. A discrepancy had been identified not in inventory, but in processing. A receipt corresponding to the time and items in question had been misfiled under a different register. The transaction had gone through. Payment had been made. The words landed softly, but their meaning hit hard. The surveillance footage, when re-examined alongside the corrected records, no longer suggested theft. The movements that had appeared suspicious now aligned with normal checkout activity. The moment that had been frozen and interpreted as concealment was simply a bag being shifted, nothing more. The accusation began to unravel in real time. The prosecutor stiffened, then slowly exhaled. His posture changed almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. The certainty he had carried earlier was gone. He flipped through his notes not to argue, but to confirm what he was hearing. He did not interrupt. He did not object. The judge continued explaining that the error originated from human mistake, not criminal intent. A cashier had misfiled paperwork at the end of a long shift. The system had flagged an absence that did not exist. From that absence, a narrative had been built. As the judge spoke, the mother felt something give way inside her. Not relief yet, not fully, more like disbelief loosening its grip. Her hands clenched for hours, relaxed slightly in her lap. She did not cry. She simply listened, afraid that any sound might break the moment. Beside her, the girl leaned closer, sensing the shift, even if she could not follow the details. The judge's voice sounded different now, kinder, firmer, less distant. The girl looked up at her mother's face and saw something she had not seen all day: hope. The judge acknowledged the seriousness of what had occurred. He stated plainly that what began as a routine case had become a matter of correction. A wrong assumption had moved too far, too fast. The court, he said, had a responsibility not only to apply the law, but to recognize when the process itself had caused harm. The room absorbed this quietly. What had once seemed like a simple theft case was now exposed as a chain of small errors compounded by assumption. The system had not intended cruelty, but intention did not erase consequence. And as the truth settled into place, the balance of the room shifted completely. The prosecutor rose slowly from his chair, not to argue, but to acknowledge what had just been placed before the court. He cleared his throat, once a habit more reflex than strategy, and stated that the records appeared to support the court's summary. He conceded that the footage, when paired with the corrected transaction, no longer supported an accusation of theft. There was no apology in his voice, but there was restraint, and that alone felt significant. The judge listened, then nodded, acknowledging the concession without satisfaction or judgment. He addressed the court again, this time more directly, stating that the charge could not stand as filed. A murmur passed through the gallery, not loud, but unmistakable in its relief. The judge explained that the purpose of the law was not only enforcement, but accuracy. He spoke about the responsibility to correct mistakes with the same seriousness used to prosecute wrongdoing. The mother felt her breath finally release a slow exhale she had been holding for days. Her vision blurred briefly, but she kept her eyes forward, unwilling to collapse into relief too soon. Beside her, the girl frowned slightly, trying to understand why the adults sounded different now. The judge's voice no longer carried distance, but responsibility, and the room responded to that shift. He stated clearly that what occurred should never have reached this point. Assumptions had moved faster than verification, and a family had been placed at risk as a result. The courtroom absorbed the words quietly without interruption. This was no longer about blame, but about repair. The judge concluded by stating that the record would reflect the error and the dismissal of the charge. He looked once more at the defendant, then at the child, his expression firm, but no longer severe. What had entered the court as suspicion was leaving as certainty built not on accusation, but on truth. The process moved forward, corrected steadier than before. And for the first time that day, justice felt present in the room. Not triumphant, not celebratory, but careful and aware of its own weight. The judge ordered the formal dismissal to be prepared immediately. The prosecutor nodded once, accepting the outcome without protest. The defense attorney placed a steady hand on the mother's shoulder, grounding her in the moment. The girl leaned fully into her mother, now exhausted but safe. Nothing erased the fear they had carried into the room, but it no longer defined the outcome. The mistake had been acknowledged, corrected, and named for what it was. The law had paused long enough to see the people standing beneath it. The courtroom settled into a quieter calm, aware of how close it had come to failing them. Truth had emerged, and with it the chance to make things right. It was not justice delayed, but justice rescued in time for everyone involved here today. The judge waited until the room had fully settled before speaking again. His voice, when it came, was steady and unmistakably clear. There was no hesitation now, no qualifiers, no room for interpretation. He stated that based on the corrected records, the verified transaction, and the misinterpretation of surveillance footage, the charge against the defendant was dismissed in full. The words carried finality. He did not rush them. He allowed each phrase to land, to be heard, to be understood. He explained that the court formally recognized the harm caused by haste and assumption, and that the responsibility for accuracy rested with the system, not the individual who had been brought before it. His tone was firm, but not harsh. It carried accountability rather than authority. As he spoke, the mother felt something inside her finally release. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and overwhelming at the same time. Her chest rose sharply as she drew in a breath she had not realized she was holding, then trembled as she let it out. The air felt different going in, lighter, safer. Her eyes filled, and this time she did not fight it. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, not out of weakness, but out of sheer exhaustion. Days of fear, of imagining worst outcomes, of preparing herself to be separated from her child, all collapsed into that moment. She lowered her head briefly, pressing her lips together as if to steady herself, then lifted her face again, unwilling to miss a second of what was happening. The girl watched her mother closely. She did not understand the legal language. Dismissed, verified, records. Those words meant nothing to her. What she understood was the change in her mother's face. The tension was gone. The fear that had lived behind her eyes all day had dissolved into something else. Relief, safety. The girl's shoulders relaxed without her noticing, mirroring her mother's release. The judge continued, acknowledging that while the dismissal corrected the legal error, it did not erase the experience. He stated plainly that the court recognized the weight such proceedings placed on families, especially children. His words were careful, deliberate, and sincere. This was not an apology, it was recognition. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. The sharpness that had defined the earlier hours softened. People sat back in their seats. A few exchanged quiet glances. The air no longer felt compressed. It felt breathable. The prosecutor remained standing, his expression composed but subdued. He did not contest the ruling. He accepted it, nodding once in acknowledgement. The defense attorney exhaled audibly, then placed a steady hand on the mother's arm, grounding her in the moment. The judge concluded by stating that the case was closed. His gavel struck once clean and final. The sound echoed briefly, then faded. And with it, the weight that had filled the room began to lift. For a few seconds after the gavel fell, no one moved. It was as if the room needed time to trust what it had just heard. The words were clear, but the impact was still settling. Then slowly the reality of it reached the benches, the tables, the corners where tension had been sitting all morning. The mother covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking as the tears finally took over. They were not quiet tears. They were not restrained. They came from a place deeper than fear, deeper than relief. They came from survival, from imagining futures that would never happen now, from knowing she would walk out of this room with her child beside her. She lowered her hands and looked at her daughter. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. The girl's face softened into a small, uncertain smile, as if she was checking whether it was really okay to feel happy yet. When her mother nodded, that was all the permission she needed. The girl leaned fully into her mother's side, pressing her face against her arm. Her body finally relaxed, the rigid alertness melting away. She did not understand the process that had brought them here, but she understood safety. She understood that whatever danger she had felt was gone now. That understanding was enough. The judge watched the moment without interrupting it. He allowed the silence to stretch, recognizing that closure did not always come in words. Sometimes it came in stillness. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less formal, though no less firm. He reminded the court that justice required care as much as decisiveness. That haste, even when unintentional, could cause real harm. He acknowledged that the child should never have borne such a burden, that while the law allowed certain procedures, it also demanded discretion. His words were measured, but they carried weight. This was a reminder not just to the room, but to the system itself. Around them, the gallery released its tension in small ways. Someone shifted and sighed. Another person wiped their eyes. A few nodded, subtly absorbing the gravity of what had almost happened. The sense of relief was collective, now shared. The prosecutor gathered his materials quietly. He did not look toward the defendant again. His role was complete. The defense attorney whispered that it was over, that they were free to go. The mother nodded, though her legs still felt weak. In the back row, Keanu remained seated, watching without drawing attention. He did not smile. He did not seek acknowledgement. He simply observed the outcome he had hoped for, satisfied that the weight had been lifted from the child's shoulders. The bailiff stepped forward to guide the next transition, but the room no longer felt rushed. The sharp edges of procedure had softened. The atmosphere carried something rare: correction without spectacle, accountability without cruelty. As the mother slowly stood, helping her daughter to her feet, she took one last look around the courtroom. The place that had felt so threatening now felt neutral, almost ordinary. Its power over her had ended. They began to walk toward the exit together, hand in hand. And with every step away from the witness stand, the fear that had followed them into the room stayed behind. The moment the judge finished speaking, the girl did not wait for instruction. She slipped free from the bench and ran. It was not graceful. Her steps were uneven, hurried, driven by something far deeper than thought. She crossed the short distance between them in a blur, arms already lifting breath, catching in her chest. She collided with her mother and wrapped herself around her with all the strength she had left. The hug was desperate and tight. Her arms locked around her mother's waist, as if letting go might undo everything that had just happened. Her face pressed into her mother's side, and she buried herself there, trembling, breathing in the familiar scent that meant safety. Her mother held her back just as fiercely, one arm around her daughter's shoulders, the other cradling the back of her head, fingers spread protectively through her hair. She bent slightly, folding herself around the child, creating a shield with her own body. Her tears fell freely now, landing in her daughter's hair, soaking into fabric and skin. She did not wipe them away. There was no need. Neither of them spoke. Words would have been too small, too fragile. Everything that mattered was already contained in the way they held each other. The fear they had shared, the silence they had endured, the relief that had finally arrived. Around them, the courtroom reacted without sound. People looked away instinctively, pretending to adjust papers or straighten coats, giving the moment privacy without acknowledging it outright. No one clapped. No one smiled broadly. This was not a victory lap. This was something more intimate and more real. The judge remained seated, his hands resting on the bench. He did not interrupt. He did not call for order. He understood that this moment was not a disruption. It was a conclusion, a necessary release after restraint that had lasted too long. The prosecutor lowered his gaze. He did not watch the embrace directly. His expression was unreadable, but his posture softened slightly, as if recognizing the human cost that had been narrowly avoided. He gathered his papers, quietly, movements deliberate, respectful. The defense attorney stepped back, allowing space. He did not insert himself into the moment. There would be time later for congratulations for legal closure. Right now, the only thing that mattered was that the child was in her mother's arms. The girl's breathing slowly began to even out. The sharp, panicked rhythm faded into something steadier. Her grip loosened just a little, though she did not pull away. She tilted her head back enough to look at her mother's face, eyes searching, confirming. Her mother nodded again this time, with a small broken smile through tears. "It's okay." The girl did not need to hear the words. She saw them. The room felt different now, lighter but not celebratory, quiet but not tense. What had happened here was not triumph over an opponent. It was survival through uncertainty. It was a family stepping back from the edge. The embrace held unbroken grounding both of them in the simple truth that they were still together. The girl stayed wrapped around her mother as if time had slowed just for them. Her small body fit perfectly against the familiar shape she had known her whole life, and for the first time that day, nothing else demanded her attention. No questions, no watching eyes, no fear of saying the wrong thing, just warmth and the steady rise and fall of her mother's breathing. Her mother rested her cheek gently against the top of the girl's head, eyes closed now, allowing herself to feel what she had held back for so long. The tension that had lived in her muscles for days drained away, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. She rocked slightly, not to soothe the child, but because the motion was instinctive, something her body had learned long before words ever mattered. The courtroom remained respectfully still. No one rushed them, no one asked them to move. The judge sat quietly, gaze lowered, understanding that procedure could wait a few moments longer. This was not disorder. This was repair. A few people in the gallery shifted their attention to the floor or the walls, giving the pair a semblance of privacy. Some swallowed hard, others blinked away moisture they had not expected to feel. No one spoke. Silence felt appropriate now, not oppressive. The prosecutor finished organizing his documents and placed them neatly into his briefcase. He did not look back again. His role was complete, and whatever conclusions he carried from this moment would remain his own. There was nothing more to say. The girl finally loosened her grip enough to lift her face. Her eyes were red and swollen, her lashes clumped with tears. She studied her mother's face carefully, as if checking for cracks for lingering fear. When she saw none, her shoulders relaxed further. She pressed her forehead lightly against her mother's stomach, breathing slowly, deeply. Her mother brushed the girl's hair back gently, fingers lingering in a familiar gesture that had comforted both of them countless times before. She whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear, words meant only for the child. The girl nodded a small, decisive movement, then clung again for a moment longer. The bailiff took a small step forward, then stopped reading the room. He waited. When the mother finally straightened, slightly signaling readiness, he approached quietly, offering guidance, without urgency. The transition was careful, respectful, unhurried. As they prepared to leave the well of the courtroom, the girl kept one arm wrapped around her mother's waist, unwilling to fully let go yet. Her mother kept a hand on her shoulder, grounding her with touch alone. They moved together slowly, as if relearning how to walk after holding still for too long. In the back row, Keanu watched the scene without expression. He did not feel the need to stand or approach. This was not his moment. It belonged to them. What mattered was that the child no longer stood alone. As they took their first steps away from the witness stand, the embrace finally loosened, but it did not end. It simply changed form, becoming a quiet connection that would carry them forward. This was not celebration. It was survival made visible. As the focus of the room settled fully on the mother and her daughter, Keanu did not move right away. He remained seated in the back row, hands resting loosely on his knees, posture unchanged. He watched as the pair slowly made their way from the witness stand, watched the way the girl stayed close, watched the way the mother kept one protective hand on her shoulder. The moment was complete without him. That was how it should be. When the bailiff gently guided the family toward the exit, the courtroom's attention followed them. Chairs shifted, heads turned. The air carried a soft sense of closure. No one was watching the back row anymore. That was when Keanu stood. The movement was unremarkable. No hesitation, no announcement. He reached for his coat, folded neatly beside him, and draped it over his arm. The fabric made a faint sound as it moved, barely audible against the low murmur of the room. He did not look around to see who noticed. He did not wait to be acknowledged. He took a step toward the side aisle, moving slowly, deliberately, as if unwilling to disrupt what had just unfolded. His shoes made quiet contact with the floor, each step measured. He passed by a few people who glanced up briefly, their expressions flickering with recognition, before shifting back to the family at the center of the room. No one stopped him. The judge remained seated, occupied with closing formalities. The prosecutor was already focused on his materials, preparing to leave. The defense attorney stayed near his client, speaking softly. The gallery's attention was where it belonged. Keanu reached the side door without ceremony. He paused there for a brief moment, not to reflect, but to ensure he was not interrupting anyone's path. When the door opened, it did so quietly, the hinge barely whispering as he slipped through. The hallway beyond was dimmer, cooler, stripped of the tension that had filled the courtroom. The sound of voices faded behind him as the door closed again, sealing the moment away. Inside the room, the story was reaching its resolution. Outside, life continued. Keanu adjusted the coat on his arm and began walking down the corridor. His pace was unhurried. There was no urgency pulling him forward, no need to escape. He had done what he came to do, even if he had not known it when the day began. He did not replay the scene in his mind. He did not linger on what might have happened if he had stayed seated. Those questions no longer mattered. What mattered was that a child was no longer afraid in a place that had nearly broken her. That knowledge was enough. As he passed a window at the end of the hall, light spilled across the floor, pale and ordinary. Outside cars moved through the street. People went about their days unaware of how close a family had come to losing everything, unaware of how quietly that future had been restored. Keanu pushed open the next door and stepped into the open air. The sounds of the city replaced the hush of the courthouse. Traffic, footsteps, distant voices, life uninterrupted. There was no applause behind him, no one called his name, no camera followed his exit. He left the way he had entered quietly, carrying nothing but his coat, and the certainty that sometimes the most important moments ended without witnesses. Outside the courtroom, the hallway stretched long and narrow, its polished floor reflecting the muted overhead lights. Keanu walked alone, the sound of his footsteps steady and unhurried. With every step, the weight of the courtroom faded a little more, replaced by the ordinary stillness of a public building returning to routine. No one stopped him. No one asked his name. That too felt right. He reached the stairwell instead of the elevator. The choice was instinctive. He descended slowly, one hand resting lightly on the railing, his coat folded over his arm. With each step down, the air felt cooler, cleaner, as if the building itself were releasing what it had been holding. The echo of voices from above disappeared completely. At the bottom, he paused briefly, not out of hesitation, but habit. He took in the quiet. A maintenance worker pushed a cart past him without a second glance. Somewhere nearby, a phone rang and was answered. The world had already moved on. When he stepped through the final set of doors, the afternoon light met him fully. The city greeted him without ceremony. Cars passed. A bus pulled to the curb. Someone laughed across the street. None of it acknowledged what had just happened inside those walls, and yet that anonymity felt like the most honest conclusion possible. Keanu adjusted his coat and walked toward the sidewalk. He did not look back at the courthouse. He did not slow down to mark the moment. He trusted that what mattered would carry itself forward without him. Inside, a mother and her daughter were finding their way back to each other, back to normal breaths and ordinary concerns. That was the outcome that counted. His presence had been a bridge, nothing more. Bridges were not destinations. They existed to be crossed, then left behind. As he merged into the flow of pedestrians, he blended easily, another figure among many. Someone glanced at him, hesitated, then kept walking. Recognition came and went without consequence. He did not acknowledge it. He did not need to. The city swallowed him quickly. Noise replaced silence. Movement replaced stillness. Life resumed its familiar pace, indifferent and relentless. Keanu welcomed that. It meant the story no longer needed him. He reached the corner and waited for the light to change. When it did, he crossed with the others, disappearing down the block. Behind him, the courthouse stood unchanged, stone and glass, holding memories it would never speak aloud. There was no recognition waiting at the end of this day, no headlines, no reward, just the quiet knowledge that when a moment asked for courage, it had been answered. And then he was gone. The courthouse doors opened and daylight spilled across the steps like something newly discovered. The mother stepped out first, then her daughter, their hands still linked fingers interlaced more tightly than usual. The air outside felt different, lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because the weight they had carried inside no longer pressed down on their chests. For a moment, they simply stood there. Cars passed. A breeze moved through the trees lining the street. Ordinary sounds returned almost unfamiliar after hours of silence and tension. The girl squinted slightly in the sunlight, then looked up at her mother, as if seeing her clearly for the first time that day. "Are we going home now?" she asked. Her voice was small, but steady. No fear threaded through it anymore. Just curiosity. The mother nodded, smiling through the last traces of tears. "Yes," she said. "We are going home." The girl considered this, then asked another question, just as simply. "What about dinner?" The question landed gently, but it carried meaning far beyond food. Dinner meant routine. It meant evening. It meant tomorrow was real. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand and answered without hesitation. "We will eat. I will make something warm. And if we are tired, that is okay too." They began walking down the steps together. Each step felt like reclaiming something that had almost been taken. The girl swung their joined hands slightly as they walked the way she used to before everything became so serious. Her shoulders were relaxed now, her breathing even. The mother watched her closely, committing the sight to memory. This was what she had been fighting for. Not just freedom from a charge, but the right to answer small questions with certainty, to promise safety without doubt, to plan for tomorrow without fear of interruption. They reached the sidewalk and paused while the light changed. The girl leaned against her mother's side, resting her head briefly against her arm. The mother placed a hand on her daughter's hair, the gesture automatic grounding. She whispered that everything was okay now, that she was safe, that nothing bad was going to happen today. The girl nodded, accepting this without needing proof. Children understood safety instinctively. They felt it before they questioned it. Across the street, people waited to cross. Among them, slightly apart, Keanu stood quietly. He did not approach. He did not wave. He simply watched long enough to see the girl smile at something her mother said, long enough to see the way the mother's posture had softened, no longer braced for impact. Satisfied, he turned away. The mother did not notice him. The girl did not know to look. That was as it should be. What mattered was not who had helped, but that help had arrived when it was needed. The light changed, and the mother and daughter crossed the street together, stepping back into a life that had almost been interrupted. Behind them, the courthouse receded into the background, another building on another block, its power over them finished. Ahead of them waited home, dinner, sleep, morning. Small, ordinary things that now felt extraordinary. And as they walked on hand in hand, one life had been forever changed, not by punishment or fear, but by the quiet return of hope. They walked several blocks before either of them spoke again. The city moved around them at its usual pace, indifferent to what they had just survived. A bus rumbled past. Someone hurried by, talking into a phone. Somewhere nearby, music drifted from an open window. Life did not pause to mark the moment, and strangely, that felt comforting. The girl skipped once, then caught herself and laughed softly, surprised by the sound of her own joy. She looked up at her mother again, studying her face as if checking whether the relief was permanent. Her mother met her gaze and smiled, not the careful smile she had worn all day, but a real one, tired and honest. "Tomorrow will be normal," the mother said, as much to herself as to her daughter. "School, homework, chores." The girl nodded, satisfied. Normal sounded good. They reached their building and climbed the steps together. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old paint. Familiar. unremarkable. The girl unlocked the door under her mother's watchful eye, a small ritual that suddenly felt important. When they stepped inside, the quiet wrapped around them gently. The girl dropped her shoes by the door and wandered toward the kitchen, opening the refrigerator as if checking that it still worked. She announced what they had and what they did not, listing items with serious consideration. Her mother listened, leaning against the counter, letting the sound of her daughter's voice fill the space that fear had occupied for too long. They decided on something simple, something warm. As water boiled and the room filled with steam, the mother felt the last of the tension leave her shoulders. She moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the fact that no one was watching. No one was judging. No one was waiting to take something away. The girl sat at the table, swinging her legs, asking questions about school tomorrow, about a test she had forgotten to worry about. Ordinary concerns returned easily, as if they had only stepped out of the room for a moment. Outside, down the street, Keanu blended into the crowd. He did not look back toward the building. He trusted what he had seen. The girl's laughter, the mother's steady hands, the future unfolding quietly without his presence. Back inside the apartment, dinner was served. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the silence. Afterward, the girl leaned against her mother on the couch, eyelids growing heavy earlier than usual. The day had taken more out of her than she realized. The mother brushed her daughter's hair back gently and promised her again that everything was okay. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and they would face them together. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one. Inside, a small home settled into peace. One life had been changed forever, not by the moment of danger, but by the moment it passed. What happened in that courtroom did not look like justice, the way movies often show it. There were no raised voices at the end, no dramatic speech that silenced the room, no moment where one side was publicly defeated while the other celebrated. Instead, justice arrived quietly, almost reluctantly, carried in on the back of compassion, patience, and a willingness to look again. The truth did not enter the room through argument. It entered through character, through a memory of integrity that had never been recorded, never rewarded, never meant to be seen again. A small act done months earlier, when no one was watching, became the missing piece that stopped a system from making a devastating mistake. That is how fragile justice can be. Not because it is weak, but because it depends on people noticing what does not fit neatly into files and footage. It depends on someone being willing to stand up, not to win, but to remind others that human beings are more than accusations. A 9-year-old girl should never have had to carry that weight. She stood in a place designed for adults and tried to answer questions she was never meant to face. Her fear was not evidence. Her silence was not guilt. It was the sound of a child trying to protect the only person she trusted in the world. Her mother's life was nearly reduced to a misfiled receipt and a misread image. Years of quiet honesty of choices made when no one was watching almost disappeared under assumption. That is how easily lives can be reshaped by moments that move too fast and look too shallow. And yet the story did not end there, because one person noticed. One person remembered something that mattered. One person chose not to stay silent when silence would have been easier and safer. Not to accuse, not to grandstand, just to tell the truth as he had seen it. That choice changed the direction of everything. It reminds us that justice is not always loud. Often it arrives softly, asking to be let in. It reminds us that integrity has a long memory even when it feels invisible. And it reminds us that small acts of honesty done without expectation can return in ways we never imagine. How many lives hinge on moments like that? How many outcomes depend on someone being willing to pause, to look closer, to speak gently but clearly when it matters most? As you reflect on this story, ask yourself something simple and deeply human. Have you ever witnessed a moment where kindness or quiet courage changed everything for someone? A moment that never made headlines but altered a life forever. And if stories like this move you, if unseen moments of justice and humanity matter to you, tell us what story you would like to see next. What quiet truth do you think deserves to be heard? Justice is often imagined as something dramatic, something that announces itself. But most of the time it moves quietly, carried by ordinary people, making difficult choices when no one is asking them to. The courtroom that day did not change because of force or volume. It changed because someone chose compassion over convenience and truth over silence. The man who stood did not seek recognition. He did not wait for permission to matter. He simply remembered a moment that revealed who someone truly was and trusted that memory enough to share it. That choice mattered because systems, no matter how carefully built, are only as fair as the people willing to humanize them. The mother did not ask to be seen as heroic. She asked only to be honest, to raise her child with integrity, even when honesty felt costly. The child did not understand law or procedure, but she understood fear and safety. When safety returned, her world returned with it. Stories like this remind us that justice is fragile, not because it fails often, but because it depends on courage that is rarely celebrated. It depends on people noticing what others overlook and caring enough to act. Many moments like this never reach a courtroom. They happen in grocery lines, on buses, in offices, and on sidewalks. A wallet returned, a voice raised gently, a pause taken when rushing would have been easier. These moments do not look powerful, but they change lives. Before you leave this story, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever seen kindness or quiet courage alter the course of someone's life? Maybe it was something small, maybe no one else noticed, but you did. And now we want to hear from you. What unseen stories of justice, compassion, and humanity would you like to see next? What moments do you believe deserve to be told, not because they are loud, but because they are true? Perhaps the most important lesson is that none of this required perfection. It required attention. It required someone to notice fear instead of dismissing it, to recognize character instead of assuming intent. The courtroom did not become gentler because rules changed. It became gentler because people chose to apply those rules with care. In a world that moves quickly, pausing can feel risky. Speaking up can feel uncomfortable. Yet, moments like this show how silence and speed can wound just as deeply as cruelty. Justice needs witnesses who are willing to see clearly and speak calmly. If this story stayed with you, consider carrying that awareness into your own life. You may never stand in a courtroom, but you will stand in moments that test your integrity. When you do remember how much difference one quiet choice can make. Stories endure when they reflect something true about us. They remind us that justice is not distant or abstract. It lives in everyday decisions, in patience, in empathy, and in courage that rarely announces itself. When we choose to act with integrity, even quietly, we participate in shaping a fairer world, one moment at a time. May this story encourage you to notice the small moments, trust your conscience, and speak when it matters. Knowing that quiet courage often carries the greatest power, and that even a single act of kindness can ripple outward, protecting lives you may never fully see, but whose impact will always matter deeply.